He was a Mafia King who exiled his family to save them. For a year, he's been a ghost, watching his son grow up from a distance. Tonight, he's crossing a line, returning to sever their last connection forever. But as he steps out of the shadows, his son looks at him and speaks a single word, a word no child should know. And in that moment, his carefully built world shatters, unleashing a war that will burn everything to the ground. Before we step into the shadows, drop a comment and tell me, which city are you watching this from right now and what's the time there? Let's see how far this story reaches. He used the environment, the steam, the noise, the confusion. He broke an arm, crushed a windpipe, became a creature of pure, desperate violence. But he was one man, and the steam was beginning to dissipate, the cloud thinning with every second that passed. He saw Silas then through the fading mist. The viper had put on a gas mask, his scarred face now a grotesque insectoid visage. He held a combat knife, its serrated edge glinting. He had waited a long time for this intimate kill. "No more guns, Lorenzo." Silas's voice was muffled by the mask. "This is just for us." Lorenzo rose to his feet, his chest heaving, his clothes soaked and smoking. He tossed his empty pistol aside. It clattered on the catwalk. He was cornered, exhausted, and out of tricks. This was it. As Silas advanced, knife held low, a new sound cut through the chaos. Not a siren, not a gunshot. It was the distinctive, powerful thwump, thwump, thwump of helicopter rotors, growing rapidly closer. A searchlight beam, brilliant and surgical, stabbed through the broken skylights of the pumping station, slicing through the remaining steam. It pinned Silas and his men in its stark, white glare. A voice, amplified and authoritative, boomed from the sky. "This is the FBI! You are surrounded! Drop your weapons and lay on the ground with your hands behind your head!" Confusion erupted among Silas's men. The calculated assassination had just become a federal siege. Silas hesitated, his masked head tilting up toward the light, his moment of triumph stolen. It was the split-second distraction Lorenzo needed. He didn't charge Silas. He turned and ran, not away, but toward Isabella and Leo. He slammed his shoulder into the stuck hatch wheel. It shrieked in protest but didn't move. "The FBI!" Isabella cried, her voice a mixture of hope and terror. "Raphael!" Lorenzo grunted, putting all his weight against the wheel. His last call, not for backup, for a deal. The Old Lion had traded their location for a chance at their salvation. On the gantry, Silas's men were in disarray, some dropping their weapons, others firing wildly at the sky. Silas himself, enraged beyond reason, ignored the FBI. His eyes, visible through the mask lenses, were locked solely on Lorenzo. He started forward, knife still in hand, a man willing to die to complete his vengeance. With a final grinding shriek, the hatch wheel gave way. Lorenzo spun it open, revealing a dark, narrow ventilation shaft. "Go! Now!" he yelled, pushing Isabella and Leo toward the opening. She scrambled in, pulling Leo after her. Lorenzo moved to follow, to seal them in, to face the final confrontation. But as he turned, Silas was there. He had closed the distance silently, a phantom in the chaos. He lunged, the combat knife aimed for Lorenzo's kidney. Lorenzo twisted, avoiding the killing blow, but the serrated edge still sliced deep into his side. He cried out, stumbling back against the hatch frame, his hand clamping over the hot, wet wound. Silas stood over him, raising the knife for the final downward plunge into Lorenzo's heart. "For Kara," the viper whispered. Before the knife could fall, a single, precise shot rang out from the far catwalk. It wasn't from an FBI sniper. It was Raphael, his revolver steady despite the chaos. The bullet struck Silas in the shoulder, spinning him around. But as Silas fell back, he didn't drop the knife. With a final, desperate surge of hatred, he threw it. The blade tumbled end over end, not toward Lorenzo, but toward the ventilation shaft, where Isabella was staring out, her face frozen in horror. It was a final spiteful act aimed at the heart of everything Lorenzo loved. Time did not slow. It became a series of fractured, horrifying images. The thrown knife, a spinning silver arc of pure malice. Isabella's wide, disbelieving eyes in the dark shaft. Leo's small, startled gasp. Lorenzo moved without conscious thought. The searing pain in his side was nothing. The FBI storming the building was background noise. There was only the trajectory of the blade and the family in its path. He threw his body sideways into the path of the knife. It was not a heroic, graceful motion. It was a desperate, clumsy lunge. The blade meant for Isabella's heart sank into the muscle of his upper arm with a sickening, wet thud. He grunted, slamming back against the hatchway, his vision swimming with white-hot agony. Through the haze, he saw Silas on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder, screaming in frustration as FBI agents in body armor swarmed the gantry, pinning him down. He saw Raphael, his revolver now on the catwalk, his hands in the air, a grim satisfaction on his face as federal agents secured him. The old lion had completed his final hunt. Lorenzo's gaze found Isabella. She was scrambling back out of the shaft, her hands reaching for him, her face a mask of terror and relief. Her fingers touched his face, his good arm. "Lorenzo!" He couldn't form words. He could only look at her. Then at Leo, safe in the dark mouth of the ventilation shaft. They were alive. That was all that mattered. The aftermath was a blur of controlled chaos. Paramedics sawed away his coat and shirt, working to stabilize the knife wound in his arm and the gash in his side. FBI agents created a perimeter, their voices sharp and professional. He was read his rights, the words washing over him like distant rain. He gave one statement, his voice a ragged whisper, to a sharp-eyed Agent Miller. He confirmed Raphael's deal, full testimony against the Conti Syndicate, Marco, and Silas Vanzetti's organization, in exchange for placement in the Witness Protection Program for Isabella, Leo, and himself. He was trading his kingdom for their lives. It was the only victory that mattered. The legal machinery ground on for months. Lorenzo's testimony, combined with Raphael's, dismantled his empire from the inside out. Marco was arrested at his penthouse, his new throne room becoming a federal holding cell. Silas, facing a litany of charges including attempted murder and kidnapping, would never see the outside of a supermax prison again. 1 year later, the sun was warm on Lorenzo's face. He stood on a weathered wooden dock, the salt tang of the Pacific Ocean filling his lungs. Before him, a small blue fishing boat named Wanderer bobbed gently in the swells. He wore faded jeans and a simple t-shirt, the fabric stretching over the physical therapy-built muscle of his shoulders. The scars on his arm and side were pale, permanent reminders. A peal of laughter made him turn. Down the beach, Isabella was chasing a 2-year-old Leo, who was running with the unsteady, joyous gait of toddlerhood on the wet sand. She wore a flowing sundress, her hair loose and blowing in the sea breeze. She was laughing, a real, unburdened laugh he hadn't heard in years. They were no longer Lorenzo, Isabella, and Leo Conti. They were Luca, Elena, and Liam Rossi. They lived in a small, sun-bleached cottage, a 5-minute walk from this dock. Luca Rossi repaired boats for a living. His hands, once used to wield power and violence, now skillfully mended nets and sanded hulls. Elena sold her paintings in a local gallery, her art now filled with light and sea, not shadows and fear. Liam ran toward him now, his small feet kicking up sand. "Papa, boat!" Lorenzo, Luca, scooped his son up, lifting him high into the air, earning a shriek of delight. He felt Isabella's arm slide around his waist from behind, her head resting against his back. "He's going to be a sailor," she murmured. "Or a fisherman," Luca replied, lowering Liam to sit on his shoulders. This was their life. It was simple. It was hard work. It was everything he had never known he wanted. The power, the fear, the constant weight of the crown. It had all been a gilded cage. This quiet rhythm of sun and sea and family was true freedom. That night, after Liam was asleep, they sat on their porch, listening to the crash of the waves. The sky was a vast blanket of stars, unobscured by city lights. "Do you ever miss it?" Elena asked softly, her hand finding his in the darkness. It was the same question, but the tone was different now, curious, not fearful. Luca was silent for a long moment, watching the constellations. He thought of the penthouse, the boardrooms, the unquestioning obedience. "I miss the idea of it," he said finally, "the illusion of control, but I don't miss the man I had to be to hold it." He squeezed her hand. "This is the only kingdom I need." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in a comfortable silence, two ghosts who had finally found their way home. The next morning, Luca was in his small workshop attached to the garage, sorting through a box of salvaged marine hardware. He moved a stack of life jackets and his hand brushed against something solid and cold at the bottom of the crate. Frowning, he pulled it out. It was a cheap prepaid cell phone, one he had never seen before. It was dead. A cold trickle of unease, a ghost from his past life, ran down his spine. How did it get there? A misplaced item from a customer? It felt wrong. He found a charger and plugged it in. After a minute, the screen lit up. There was a single message. It had been received 1 week ago. The message contained no text, only a photograph. It was a picture of them, taken from a distance with a long lens. It showed Luca, Elena, and Liam building a sandcastle on their beach, the one they thought was their secret, safe haven. The photograph was crystal clear. As he stared, his blood turning to ice, the phone vibrated softly in his hand. A new message arrived. The new message contained just 5 words. "The lion should have stayed dead." "There," he said, pointing. "An old drainage conduit from the loading docks. Does it still connect to the storm system?" A flicker of memory crossed Raphael's face. It did. It was narrow, clogged with decades of filth. "I sealed it off." "Unseal it," Lorenzo commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Raphael moved to the wall, prying at a rusted metal plate with a crowbar, Lorenzo turned to Isabella. He gripped her shoulders, his touch firm, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me. When that plate comes off, you take Leo and you go. You do not stop. You do not look back. You follow the tunnel. It will lead to the river. You get out and you run." Her eyes were wide with terror. "What about you?" "I will hold them here. I will give you time." "No, Lorenzo, please. This is not a debate," he snarled, his face inches from hers, the king's fury blazing in his eyes. "This is the only move we have left. You protect our son. That is your only mission. Do you understand me?" Tears streamed down her face, but she gave a single, sharp nod. With a groan of protesting metal, the plate came free, revealing a dark, narrow pipe, stinking of stagnant water and decay. It was a tight fit, even for her. Another sound came from above, the distinct hiss of a canister being deployed. A gas grenade tumbled down the stairs, bouncing and clattering before coming to a rest at the bottom, already spewing thick, white smoke. "Now!" Lorenzo roared. He shoved Isabella toward the opening. She scrambled into the pipe, clutching a now crying Leo to her chest, disappearing into the absolute blackness. Lorenzo turned. Pulling the neck of his shirt up over his nose and mouth, Raphael stood beside him, his back to the wall, his vintage revolver held steady. The white smoke began to fill the room, stinging their eyes. The first shadowy figure appeared at the top of the stairs, silhouetted by the warehouse light. Lorenzo raised his pistol, but the figure didn't charge. It simply stood there. And then, a voice, amplified and eerily calm, echoed down into the choking haze. It wasn't Silas, it was Marco. "Lorenzo! It's over! The building is surrounded. Come out, and I give you my word, Isabella and the boy will be spared." Lorenzo didn't bother to reply. A liar's word was worthless. He aimed and fired. The shot ricocheted off the concrete wall near the figure's head, sending it ducking back for cover. The gas was thickening, clouding their vision. Lorenzo and Raphael exchanged a final grim look. This was the last stand. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos, not from the stairs, but from the pipe behind them. A short, sharp, terrified scream. Isabella's scream. It was cut off almost instantly, followed by the sound of a struggle, and then silence. Lorenzo's blood turned to ice. From the darkness of the drainage pipe, a man's voice, smooth and triumphant, called out, "The rabbit bolted right into the snare, Lorenzo. You should have known. Vipers love dark holes." Silas had not been waiting upstairs. He had been waiting at the other end of the tunnel. The world shrank to the echo of that silent scream. The gas, the men on the stairs, Raphael at his side. It all faded into a distant hum. The only thing that existed was the dark maw of the drainage pipe and the silence that had swallowed his family. Bella. Lorenzo's roar was raw, a sound torn from a place deeper than rage or fear. He lunged for the opening, but Raphael's gnarled hand clamped onto his arm with surprising strength. "It's a trap, boy. He has her. Going in there blind is what he wants." Lorenzo shook him off, his vision tinged with red. Reason was a luxury he could no longer afford. His family was in that darkness. He charged into the pipe, the stench of decay filling his nostrils, his shoulders scraping against the rough, corroded metal. He didn't care about the narrow confines, the darkness, the men at his back. He was a missile locked on a target. The tunnel seemed to stretch for an eternity before a faint light appeared ahead. He emerged into a cavernous, rusted-out pumping station, part of the old dock's infrastructure. A single flickering, fluorescent tube swung from a frayed wire, casting erratic shadows. And there they were. Isabella was on her knees, held roughly by a hulking enforcer, one of his men, a traitor. A hand was clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Leo was wailing in the arms of another man, his small cries echoing in the vast space. Standing between Lorenzo and his family, a cruel smile etched onto his fire-ravaged face, was Silas the Viper Vanzetti. Half his face was a web of shiny, twisted scar tissue, a permanent testament to Lorenzo's past mercy, a bullet to the fuel tank, an inferno meant to erase a rival. "Lorenzo," Silas hissed, his voice like gravel. So predictable. The mighty king, brought to his knees by sentiment. "Let them go, Silas. This is between us." Lorenzo's finger rested on the trigger of his pistol, but the angles were all wrong. A stray shot could hit Isabella or Leo. "Between us?" Silas let out a dry, rattling laugh. "You still don't see it, do you? You think this is about territory? About power?" He took a step forward, his good eye blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost holy. "You took everything from me, Lorenzo, but not my business, not my soldiers." He gestured with his chin toward Isabella and Leo. "You think this is the first family you've destroyed?" Lorenzo stood frozen, his mind racing, searching for a meaning he couldn't grasp. "The night you saved your precious Isabella from the Bianchi family," Silas continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "The night you stormed their warehouse, guns blazing, the hero claiming his prize. Do you remember?" A cold knot tightened in Lorenzo's stomach. He remembered. It was the operation that had cemented his reputation for ruthless efficiency. He remembered Isabella, tied to a chair, terrified. He remembered gunning down the Bianchi men who held her. "You were so focused on your damsel in distress," Silas sneered. "You didn't check the back office. You didn't see the young woman hiding under the desk. My sister, Cara. She was Bianchi's bookkeeper. Innocent. She was going to leave that life. She was going to start over." The air left Lorenzo's lungs. He saw it now. A flash of memory. a fleeting glimpse of a frightened face, a pair of wide eyes in the shadows, before the room was consumed by smoke and chaos. He had written it off as another enemy, collateral damage. "You murdered her." Silas's voice broke, the raw pain cutting through his hatred. "You set the fire to cover your tracks, and you burned her alive. She was 22 years old." The revelation landed like a physical blow, reshaping the entire war. This wasn't business. This was a blood feud. Every move, every betrayal was fueled by a brother's grief. Marco's ambition was just a tool. Silas's endgame was not a throne. It was an altar, built on Lorenzo's ruin. "Now you understand," Silas said, raising his own pistol and aiming it not at Lorenzo, but at Isabella's head. "Now you know the price of your crown. You took my family. Now I take yours." Lorenzo saw Isabella's eyes close, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. He saw Leo sobbing, reaching for his mother. He was out of options, out of time. The truth was a poison, and it had paralyzed him. He slowly, deliberately lowered his pistol. It clattered on the concrete floor. "I'm the one you want," Lorenzo said, his voice hollow. "Let them go. My life for theirs. That's the trade." Silas's smile was a terrifying thing. "Oh, I will. But first, you need to watch." His finger began to tighten on the trigger. As Silas's finger tightened, a gunshot exploded through the pumping station. But it didn't come from Silas's gun. It came from the tunnel entrance behind Lorenzo. The enforcer, holding Isabella, grunted, a bloom of red appearing on his chest as he crumpled to the ground. Standing in the swirling gas and shadows of the tunnel mouth, revolver smoking in his hand, was Raphael, and his aim was now locked directly on Silas. "You forgot, Viper," the old man rasped. "Lions travel in prides." The gunshot was a crack of divine intervention. The enforcer's grip on Isabella vanished as he fell. In the fractured second of shock that followed, Silas's aim wavered, his focus torn between Lorenzo and the new threat in the tunnel. It was all the opening Lorenzo needed. He didn't go for his fallen gun. He became a weapon himself. He launched forward, closing the distance to Silas in 3 powerful strides. He slammed into the Viper, driving him back, his hands closing around the wrist of the gun hand. The pistol discharged again, the bullet whining as it ricocheted off a steel pipe. Chaos erupted. The second enforcer, startled, fumbled with the wailing Leo. Isabella, freed and fueled by a surge of primal adrenaline, didn't run. She moved. Her hand went to the small of her back, to the cool leather sheath. The stiletto dagger felt like an extension of her own fury as she drew it. As the enforcer turned toward the struggle between Lorenzo and Silas, Isabella lunged. She wasn't a trained killer, but she was a mother. The slender, razor-sharp blade sank deep into the man's thigh, finding the soft tissue above his knee. He roared in pain and surprise, his grip on Leo loosening. Isabella tore her son from his arms, stumbling back. Raphael advanced from the tunnel mouth, his vintage revolver barking twice, keeping the other traders who were now pouring from the main warehouse entrance at bay. He was a grizzled old lion holding the line. The pumping station became a brutal, close-quarters arena. Lorenzo and Silas were a whirlwind of violence, a decade of hatred expressed in grunts, and the sickening thud of flesh hitting flesh. Silas was fueled by vengeance, but Lorenzo was powered by something more primal, the need to protect. He drove a knee into Silas's gut, then slammed his forehead into the bridge of the Viper's nose. Cartilage crunched. Silas staggered back, blood streaming down his ruined face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He raised his pistol again, his eyes wild with pain and fury. But Lorenzo was already on him, grabbing his arm and forcing it upward. The gun fired into the ceiling, raining down rust and dust. Isabella, clutching Leo, scanned the chaos. The main exit was blocked by Raphael's firefight. The tunnel was behind Raphael. Their only other path was a rusted metal staircase that led up to a gantry and a series of catwalks high above the pumping floor, a forgotten network of maintenance access. "Lorenzo!" she screamed, pointing upward. He saw it. With a final, powerful shove, he sent Silas stumbling back into a control panel. Sparks flew. "Go!" he yelled at her. Isabella didn't hesitate. She turned and ran for the stairs, Leo clinging to her, his cries muffled against her neck. The metal steps groaned under her weight. Lorenzo broke from Silas and sprinted after them, scooping up his fallen pistol as he passed. Raphael provided covering fire, his shots precise and economical, forcing their pursuers to take cover. They reached the gantry, a narrow mesh walkway suspended over the vast, dark emptiness of the main pumping chamber below. The air was thick with the smell of rust and stale water. They were rats in a maze, but they had the high ground. Silas, enraged, screamed orders from below. His men began to fan out, some providing covering fire, others starting up a second staircase at the far end of the chamber. The catwalk was about to become a shooting gallery. Lorenzo pushed Isabella and Leo behind a large, greasy turbine housing, a temporary shield. He returned fire, the reports of his pistol deafening in the metal enclosure. A bullet sparked off the railing inches from his head. They were trapped. The catwalk led to a dead end, a solid brick wall. There was no way out. Isabella pressed against the cold metal, Leo's small body shaking against her chest. Her eyes met Lorenzo's. In them she saw no surrender, only a fierce, burning calculation. He was looking past her at the wall. It wasn't entirely solid. There was a service hatch, a square of rusted metal, barely large enough for a person, sealed with a heavy manual wheel. "That hatch!" Lorenzo shouted over the gunfire. "It has to lead to the old ventilation system. It's our only chance." But to reach it, they would have to cross 10 feet of completely exposed catwalk, directly in the line of fire from Silas's men, who were now advancing along the parallel gantry. It was an impossible run. Lorenzo looked at Isabella, then at Leo. He saw the understanding dawn in her eyes. They were out of moves, out of time. He made a decision. "When I give the signal, you run for that hatch. You don't look back. You get through, and you seal it from the other side." "No, Lorenzo, I won't leave you." "You will," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "You have to save our son." He turned from her, stepping out from behind the turbine. He stopped in the middle of the exposed catwalk, a perfect solitary target. He raised his pistol, not to fire, but to draw every eye, every weapon. "Silas!" he roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You want a king? Come and get one!" He stood there, a stark silhouette against the flickering light, drawing the fire of every enemy gunman away from the hatch, away from his family. As gunfire erupted, focused entirely on Lorenzo's position, Isabella made a desperate lunge for the hatch. She grabbed the rusted wheel, but as she did, a bullet meant for Lorenzo ricocheted off the railing and struck the turbine housing beside her. There was a sharp hiss, then a deep, groaning shudder as the ancient machinery, its pressure lines severed, began to violently overheat. A warning siren blared to life, and a jet of scalding chemical steam erupted from a ruptured valve, cutting off her path to the hatch and engulfing Lorenzo in a blinding, toxic cloud. The world dissolved into a hellish, screaming whiteness. The chemical steam was a physical wall, scalding and acidic, burning Lorenzo's exposed skin and searing his lungs with every ragged breath. The gunfire ceased, replaced by the deafening roar of escaping pressure and the blaring emergency siren. He was blind, disoriented, a king dethroned in a cloud of his own ruin. Through the blistering haze, he heard Silas's triumphant shout, "Finish him! Now!" Boots pounded on the gantry, closing in. Lorenzo dropped to the hot mesh floor, crawling, his pistol a useless weight in his hand. Vision was a liability. He relied on sound, on the vibrations through the metal. A shape loomed out of the steam, a rifle barrel sweeping the area. Lorenzo lashed out with his legs, sweeping the man's feet from under him. He heard a cry, a crash, and then a sickening final crack as the man tumbled over the railing into the darkness below. But there were more. He could feel them surrounding him. On the other side of the steam jet, Isabella screamed his name. The sound torn away by the industrial roar. The scalding barrier was absolute, a geyser of boiling death separating them. She pulled at the hatch wheel, but decades of rust held it fast. They were trapped, watching his end through a boiling curtain. Lorenzo fought like a demon, a ghost in the fog. He ushered them inside, the heavy door closing behind them with a sound of finality, sealing them in utter blackness. Lorenzo pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, the beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness. It illuminated a vast, empty space filled with the skeletal remains of forgotten machinery. And standing in the center of the beam, holding a vintage revolver pointed directly at Lorenzo's chest, was an old man with a face like a roadmap of hard living. Raphael. His eyes, sharp and unforgiving, scanned Lorenzo, then moved to Isabella and the child clinging to her. The suspicion on his face did not lessen. "Lorenzo," the old man said, his voice a dry rasp, "you were a ghost. Now you are a target. And you have brought your heart with you into the grave." He lowered the revolver slightly, his gaze settling on Leo. "The Viper has been hunting for a year. He didn't want your empire. He wanted your soul. And now," Raphael's eyes locked with Lorenzo's, "he knows you've just given it to him." The beam of Lorenzo's flashlight trembled, casting dancing shadows across Raphael's grim face. The old man's words hung in the frigid air, more chilling than the damp cold of the warehouse. The Viper. A name from a past Lorenzo had sealed shut, a name that belonged to a man who should be dead. "The Viper is a ghost," Lorenzo stated, his voice flat, a refusal to accept the reality taking shape in the dark. Raphael's laugh was a dry, rattling sound. "Ghosts have a habit of returning when you forget to burn the body." He lowered the revolver completely, his eyes like chips of flint, scanning the vast, empty space around them. "Silas Vanzetti did not die in that warehouse fire you set. He crawled out of the inferno, a broken, burning thing. And for a year, he has been rebuilding, not an empire, but a vendetta. He doesn't want your territory. He wants to watch you lose everything you care for before he kills you." Isabella clutched Leo tighter, the name Silas Vanzetti clearly meaning nothing to her, but the venom in Raphael's voice was translation enough. This was personal. This was hatred forged in fire. Lorenzo's mind raced, recontextualizing the last year, the small, inexplicable losses, the leaks, the sense of a shadow he could never quite see. It wasn't carelessness. It was a patient, meticulous predator drawing a noose. "He's working with Marco," Lorenzo said, the betrayal a fresh wound. "Of course he is," Raphael rasped, turning and gesturing for them to follow him deeper into the darkness. "Marco provides the infrastructure, the intelligence, the reach. Silas provides the fangs. Together, they offer the other families a clean slate, your head on a platter, and a new, united front. You are the price of peace, Lorenzo." They moved through a labyrinth of rusted machinery and forgotten crates. Raphael led them to a section of the warehouse that looked no different from the rest until he pressed a hidden lever. A section of the concrete floor, cleverly counterweighted, swung upward to reveal a steep staircase leading down. The space below was a stark contrast to the decay above. It was a Spartan but functional bunker, reinforced concrete walls, military-grade communications equipment on a desk, a small kitchenette, and bunk beds. A single, powerful battery-powered lamp cast a sterile white light. "This is our tomb?" Isabella asked, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "This is your sanctuary," Raphael corrected, his gaze lingering on Leo, who was finally sleeping, exhausted by terror. For now. Lorenzo stood rigidly in the center of the room, the adrenaline of the fight and flight beginning to recede, leaving a cold, hard clarity in its wake. He was trapped. His organization was a weapon aimed at his back. His enemy was a specter from a past he thought he'd buried, and his only assets were a disgraced old man, a terrified woman, and a child. He walked to the communications desk, his fingers brushing over the cold, silent equipment. We need to know their next move. We're reacting. That's how you lose. Silas's move is obvious, Raphael said, settling into a worn armchair with a groan. He has shown you he can strike at your family. He will now offer you a choice, a trade, your surrender for their lives. He will want it public, a humiliation. He'll want me to come to him, Lorenzo murmured, his eyes distant, already playing out the scenario. Alone. And it will be a trap, Isabella said from the corner where she had laid Leo on a lower bunk. She was wrapping a blanket around him, her movements gentle, but her voice was hard as steel. You can't go. Lorenzo turned to look at her. The fear in her eyes had been refined into a sharp, protective anger. I have to. That's what he wants. He'll kill you. He'll kill me if I don't, Lorenzo countered, his voice low and final. This way I choose the ground. This way I have a chance to draw him out. To end this. It's a suicide mission, Raphael stated, not as a protest, but as a tactical assessment. It's a gambit, Lorenzo corrected. He walked over to the bunk and looked down at his sleeping son. Leo's face was peaceful, innocent, a stark contrast to the world of violence he had been born into. Lorenzo reached out, and with a tenderness that seemed alien to his nature, brushed a curl from the boy's forehead. He then turned to Isabella. Her arms were crossed, a defiant stance, but he could see the tremor in her hands. He reached into an inner pocket of his torn and stained overcoat. He pulled out a small, slender object, sheathed in worn leather. It was a stiletto dagger, its handle intricately carved with the Conti family crest, a lion and a thorned rose. He held it out to her. She stared at it, then at him, uncomprehending. No matter what happens, Lorenzo said, his voice barely a whisper, but every syllable laden with intent. No matter what you see, or what you hear, or what you think is happening, you keep this hidden. You stay close to Leo, and you be ready. Isabella's eyes widened. He wasn't just saying goodbye. He was giving her a role, a weapon. He was trusting her with a piece of the plan. Ready for what? She breathed, her fingers closing around the cool leather sheath. Lorenzo's phone, which had been silent, buzzed on the metal desk. A single, unknown number. No message. Just a video file. A cold dread settled in Lorenzo's stomach. He walked to the desk and tapped the screen. The video was shaky, taken from a hidden camera. It showed a cozy living room. A familiar elderly woman was pouring tea, Donatella, and sitting on her sofa, smiling warmly and accepting a cup, was Gabriella. The video zoomed in on Gabriella's hand. Resting on her knee almost casually was Leo's favorite toy, a small stuffed elephant he called Ellie. The video ended. The message was clear. There was no safe place. Their entire world had been infiltrated. Lorenzo's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a direct call from Silas the Viper Vanzetti. The screen lit up with the number, a silent, menacing demand for an answer. The sterile light of the bunker seemed to pulse with the vibration of the phone. The image of Gabriella holding Leo's toy was a violation more profound than the sniper's bullet. It whispered that their enemy was not just outside the walls, but woven into the very fabric of the life Isabella had so carefully built. The sanctuary felt like a glass box, suddenly transparent. Lorenzo looked at the screen. The number was blocked, but he knew. They all knew. He accepted the call and put it on speaker, placing the phone on the steel desk. He said nothing. Silence was a weapon. Let the viper break it first. A low, sibilant laugh filtered through the speaker, a sound like dry scales sliding over stone. Lorenzo, the king in his castle, or should I say, his hole in the ground? The voice was raspy, damaged, each word carrying the ghost of the fire that should have killed him. It was the voice of a man remade by pain. Silas, Lorenzo acknowledged, his own voice a flat, cold sheet of iron. I see you received my little home movie. Charming, isn't she? Gabriella has such a way with children, and with lonely old women. The casual cruelty was a deliberate prod. She's been such a good friend to your Isabella, so supportive. It's a pity you had to disrupt their pleasant little arrangement. In the corner, Isabella made a small, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. The betrayal by a friend was a fresh, personal wound. "What do you want, Silas?" Lorenzo's tone was devoid of all emotion, a negotiator dealing with a hostile force. "What I've always wanted, justice. You took my life, Lorenzo, my face, my future. You left me to burn, but I didn't. I crawled from the ashes with one purpose, to return the favor." The veneer of amusement vanished, replaced by a raw, seething hatred. "I don't want your empire. Marco can have the rotting carcass of your organization. I want your soul. Get to the point. The point is your son, Lorenzo. The point is the woman you thought you could hide from the world from me. I have a sniper's crosshair on Donatella's house right now. One word from me and your son's beloved auntie becomes a red stain on her floral wallpaper. And that's just the beginning." Lorenzo's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the desk. He could feel Isabella's terrified gaze burning into his back. Raphael stood immobile, his face a grim mask. "Name your terms," Lorenzo said. "Simple, a trade. You for them. You will come to the old shipyard, Pier 7, alone, unarmed. You will get on your knees and you will beg me for their lives. You will renounce your title, your name, everything. You do this and I will let Isabella and the boy disappear. I give you my word." The words hung in the air, obscene in their simplicity. It was a trap so obvious it was an insult. He would be killed the moment he was disarmed. But the alternative was a slow, systematic destruction of everyone he loved, starting with the innocent old woman who had shown Isabella kindness. "Your word is worthless," Lorenzo stated. "Perhaps, but it's the only one you have. You have 1 hour. Come to the pier, or I start burning your world down, piece by piece, until all you have left is the sound of their screams." The line went dead. The silence in the bunker was absolute, broken only by Leo's soft, sleeping breaths. Isabella surged to her feet. "You can't go. It's a suicide mission. He'll kill you the second he sees you." "He'll kill Donatella and then come for you if I don't," Lorenzo replied, his voice terrifyingly calm. He was already moving, checking the magazine in his pistol before sliding it back into his holster. "There has to be another way," she pleaded, stepping in front of him. "We can run. We can take Donatella and we can all run right now." "And go where?" Raphael's voice cut through her desperation. "He has Marco's resources. He has eyes at every airport, train station, and bus depot for 200 miles. Running is a slow death sentence. This is a move, a desperate one, but a move nonetheless." Lorenzo stopped and finally looked at Isabella. He saw the fierce, protective love in her eyes, the same love that had once been solely for him. This is the only way to draw him into the open, to end this. He'll have the pier surrounded. You'll be walking into a kill zone. "I'm counting on it," Lorenzo said, a dark, dangerous light in his eyes. He wasn't planning on surrender. He was planning on a massacre, a last stand. He brushed past her and headed for the stairs. "Raphael, you know what to do." The old man gave a grim nod. Isabella stood frozen, watching him go. the weight of the hidden stiletto dagger feeling like a block of ice against her skin. He was leaving to die for them, the final brutal proof of a love he could never articulate with words. Lorenzo paused at the base of the stairs, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dim light from above. He didn't look back. As Lorenzo's foot touched the first step, his encrypted phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. It contained a single chilling photograph, a real-time image of Raphael's hidden bunker, taken from inside the warehouse above, with the timestamp reading just seconds ago. The caption underneath read, "The king is not the only one who knows about old fortresses. See you soon." The photograph on the phone screen was a violation so absolute it stole the air from the bunker. It wasn't a threat from outside, it was a cancer from within. The timestamp glowed. 45 seconds ago, their sanctuary was compromised. They were not hiding. They were on display. Lorenzo's head snapped up, his eyes locking with Raphael's. The old man's face, a lifetime of survival etched into its lines, was a mask of cold fury. His sanctuary, his last secret, had been defiled. He knew, Raphael rasped, the words tasting of ash. He always knew about this place. The implications detonated in the small space. Silas hadn't just followed Lorenzo here. He had been waiting. He had allowed them to believe they had found a refuge, only to slam the cage door shut. The call, the ultimatum for the pier, it was all theater. A distraction to make Lorenzo commit to a course of action while the real trap was already sprung here. The sterile white light of the bunker now felt like an interrogation lamp. Every shadow in the corners seemed to hold a watching eye. Leo, sensing the fresh wave of tension, began to fuss in his sleep. "The pier is a feint," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. He was no longer a man walking to his death. He was a cornered animal calculating its last bloody move. "He doesn't want me to come to him. He's coming here." He drew his pistol, the sound of the slide racking a brutal punctuation in the silence. He tossed a second, smaller weapon to Raphael, who caught it with a sure, steady hand. Isabella instinctively moved to the bunk, gathering Leo into her arms, her body a shield. "How?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How did he find this place?" Raphael's eyes, filled with a sudden, horrifying realization, darted to the communications equipment. "The signal. My emergency beacon to you, Lorenzo. It was the only time this location has been active in a year. He must have been monitoring the old frequencies, waiting for a ghost to call another ghost. They had led him here themselves. A heavy, metallic clang echoed from the warehouse above. Then another. Not a subtle approach. It was the announcement, a deliberate, percussive beat signaling the beginning of the end. Lorenzo moved to the reinforced door at the base of the stairs, pressing his ear against the cold steel. He could hear the scuff of boots on concrete, multiple pairs, moving with purpose. They were fanning out, surrounding the entrance. "They'll use gas," Raphael stated flatly, checking the chamber of his pistol. "Or explosives. They won't come down the stairs into a firing lane." Lorenzo's mind raced, discarding options as fast as they formed. Fight their way out? A suicide charge up a single staircase against an unknown number of hostiles. Wait them out? They would be flushed out like rats. His gaze swept the bunker, past the communications desk, the bunks, the supplies, and landed on a section of the wall that looked different. The concrete was slightly darker, less finished. A relic from when this place was a functioning warehouse, her own shock eclipsed by this new, miraculous terror. That's his first, she whispered, her voice trembling. The spell was shattered by the sudden aggressive roar of an engine. A large black SUV with tinted windows, which had been parked further down the street, now surged forward. It didn't slow as it passed the house. Instead, the passenger side window slid down smoothly. Lorenzo's instincts, dulled for a single fatal second by emotion, snapped back into place with the force of a thunderclap. His body moved before his mind fully processed the threat. He lunged forward, not as a visitor, but as a soldier. He grabbed Isabella and the boy, shoving them back into the house with a force that sent them stumbling into the hallway. He saw the muzzle flash from the SUV's window a fraction of a second before he heard the sharp, sickening thwump of a silenced round. The bullet tore into the doorframe exactly where Isabella's head had been, splintering the wood and sending a shower of paint chips into the air. As Lorenzo slammed the heavy door shut, plunging them into the dim, safe light of the entryway, his eyes met Isabella's. Her face was a mask of pure, undiluted horror. The cozy, domestic illusion was utterly vaporized. He had found his family, and in doing so, he had led the wolves directly to their door. The door is slammed shut, but they are trapped inside, with an unknown assailant in a black SUV outside who has just taken a shot at them. The world dissolved into a hyper-focused reality of survival. The lock on the front door clicked shut. A flimsy sound against the threat outside. Lorenzo's body was a coiled spring, every sense screaming. The scent of Isabella's lavender candle, the cheerful cartoon music still playing from the living room, the warm, domestic air. It was all a lie. This was a battlefield now. "Get down! Stay away from the windows!" His voice was a low, sharp command, the voice of the king, not the ghost. It brooked no argument. He didn't wait to see if they obeyed. In one fluid motion, he drew a sleek, black pistol from a shoulder holster beneath his coat. The metallic slide racking back was a brutal, foreign sound in the small hallway. He pressed his back against the wall beside the front door, peering through the narrow gap in the curtains. The black SUV was gone, vanished. No squealing tires, no engine roar fading into the distance. It had simply disappeared back into the rain-slicked night, a phantom. That was worse. A messy, panicked attack was one thing. This was professional, calculated. "Lorenzo." Isabella's voice was a strained whisper from the floor. She was curled on the patterned rug, her body a protective shield over Leo, who was beginning to whimper, confused by the sudden violence and his mother's fear. "Don't speak," he ordered, his eyes still scanning the street. "Is there a back door? A basement?" "Back door, through the kitchen. Basement stairs are next to it." Her answer was quick, practical. The Isabella he remembered had always been sharp under pressure. It was a flicker of the woman he'd known, buried under a year of fear. He moved, a predator in the confines of her home. He checked the living room first, his gaze sweeping over the toys. The sofa, the photographs on the mantel, a life he wasn't part of. He pulled the living room curtains shut, plunging the room into gloom. The kitchen was next, a small, tidy space. He locked the back door and shoved a wooden chair under the knob. It was a feeble barrier, but it would make noise. The basement door was locked. Good. He turned to see Isabella standing now, Leo clutched on her hip, his face buried in her neck. Her eyes were wide but dry. She was holding it together for the child. "Who was that?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and fury. "I don't know." It was the truth, and the admission tasted like ash. His ignorance was a weapon they could use. He had become the vulnerability. "They found me. You said I would be safe. You promised." The accusation was a physical blow. "They didn't find you," he said, his voice dangerously low. He moved back toward the front of the house, checking the side window. "They followed me." The implication hung in the air, cold and suffocating. He had been the beacon, leading death to their doorstep. His selfish need to see her, to sever the tie, had accomplished the exact opposite. He had reforged it in blood and gunpowder. Leo let out a small, scared cry, reaching a hand out toward the spot where Lorenzo stood. Padrone? The word, spoken now in fear, lanced through Lorenzo. He looked at the boy. truly looked at him. He saw his own eyes, his own stubborn jawline, but he saw Isabella in the soft curve of his cheek and the delicate shape of his ears. This was his son, a child he had condemned to a life on the run, a life he himself had just put in the crosshairs. A new kind of coldness settled over him, different from the calculated chill of business. This was a glacial, paternal fury. The world outside ceased to be a map of territories and rivals. It was now a landscape of threats to be eliminated. His phone vibrated, not the encrypted one, but his regular line. A number he knew by heart. Marco. He answered, putting it on speaker. Talk. Lorenzo. Marco's voice was smooth, concerned, the perfect consigliere. Our friends in Philadelphia just reported some unusual activity in a quiet neighborhood, gunshots, a description of a man matching yours fleeing a residence. Are you all right? What is your location? I can have a team there in minutes. The words were right. The tone was perfect. But the timing was impossible. The attack had happened less than 90 seconds ago. For Marco to already have a report, for him to know the city, to know it was gunshots and not a car backfiring, Lorenzo's blood ran cold. He looked at Isabella, whose face had gone from furious to pale with a dawning, horrific understanding. She knew Marco. She knew he was Lorenzo's right hand, his brother. The situation is contained, Lorenzo said, his voice betraying nothing. I don't need a team. Lorenzo, be reasonable. If you're compromised, the entire organization is at risk. Let me help you. Just give me the address. It was a trap, a beautifully laid, perfectly baited trap. Marco wasn't offering help. He was confirming the target. I'll handle it, Lorenzo said and ended the call. The silence in the hallway was heavier than before. The cheerful cartoon music had given way to a commercial jingle, a grotesque parody of normalcy. Marco, Isabella breathed, her voice barely audible. Lorenzo gave a single grim nod. The betrayal was a poison ivy, curling around his lungs, making it hard to breathe. His most trusted, the man who had stood as his best man. He had given Marco his empire to watch over, and the man had used it to hunt his family. He had to get them out. This house was a tomb. They needed to move to a secure location, a place not even Marco knew about. But to do that, they had to cross the open ground between this door and his car. Listen to me, he said, turning to Isabella. All emotion was gone from his face, replaced by the cold focus of a military operation. We are leaving now. We go to the car. You will carry Leo. You will stay behind me. You will not stop no matter what you hear. Do you understand? She nodded, her arms tightening around their son. Lorenzo moved to the front door, his pistol held ready. He took a deep breath, his hand on the lock. This was the moment. He would throw open the door and they would run into the unknown, trusting his skill and his steel to protect them. He glanced back one last time. Isabella's eyes were locked on his, a silent testament to a trust that had been shattered and was now being brutally, necessarily, reforged. Leo watched him, his little face serious, as if he understood the gravity of the moment. Lorenzo unlocked the door and pulled it open. The porch was empty. The street was quiet. The rain continued to fall. He stepped out first, his body a shield, his eyes scanning the shadows, the rooftops, the parked cars. He gestured for them to follow. Isabella rushed out, holding Leo close, her steps quick and silent on the wet porch. They moved down the path toward the sleek black car parked at the curb. It felt like a mile. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves was a potential threat. Lorenzo kept his body between them and the street, his weapon up and ready. They reached the car. He hit the key fob, the doors unlocking with a soft, definitive click. He opened the back door for Isabella, and she scrambled inside with Leo, pulling the door shut. A wave of relief, premature and foolish, washed over him. They had made it. As he moved to the driver's side, his eyes caught a glint of light from the house across the street. Not from a window, from the rain-glistened branches of the oak tree he had stood under just minutes before. It was a sniper's scope, and it was aimed directly at the back seat of the car where his son was sitting. From the shadows of the oak tree across the street, the glint of a sniper's scope zeroes in on the back seat of the car where Isabella and Leo are hiding. Time did not slow, it fractured. The glint of the scope was a punctuation mark in the dark, a full stop to the fragile hope of escape. There was no thought, only a primal cellular reaction. Lorenzo's body moved with a speed born of 1,000 dark nights and close calls. He didn't shout a warning. A sound would take milliseconds they did not have. He threw himself not into the driver's seat but across the hood of the car. The cold, wet metal slammed against his ribs. His left hand, splayed wide, found purchase on the rain-slicked surface. His right, still clutching the pistol, came up as his body did, a human shield between the sniper and the back passenger window. Crack. The sound was flat, precise, the sonic crack of a high-velocity round parting the air. It wasn't the Hollywood bang of a handgun. It was the sound of professional execution. The bullet tore through the rear driver's side window, the safety glass exploding inward in a cascade of tiny, crystalline cubes. It passed through the space where Lorenzo's chest had been a half-second before, burying itself with a sickening thud into the dashboard. A shrill, terrified scream erupted from the back seat. Isabella. Leo's confused whimpers escalated into full-blown, panicked wails. Lorenzo didn't hear them. His world had narrowed to the tree line. His finger squeezed the trigger of his own weapon twice in rapid succession. Bang, bang. The reports were deafening in the confined space of the suburban street. He wasn't aiming to hit. He was aiming to suppress, to disrupt the sniper's aim, to buy a single, precious second. He rolled off the hood, landing in a crouch beside the driver's door. "Get down, on the floor!" he roared into the car, his voice a raw, guttural command. He yanked the driver's door open and slid inside, the scent of gunpowder and broken glass filling his nostrils. The engine was already running. He'd left it idling as a precaution. He slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The powerful car lurched forward, tires screeching against the wet asphalt. He didn't head down the street. That was a shooting gallery. He swerved violently, mounting the curb and crashing through the low boxwood hedge that separated the property from its neighbor. He plowed across the manicured lawn, the suspension groaning in protest. In the rearview mirror, he saw a figure drop from the lower branches of the oak tree, landing with a practiced roll. The sniper was mobile, agile. A second black SUV, identical to the first, now peeled out from a side alley, blocking the other end of Maple Drive. They were boxed in. "Hold on!" Lorenzo snarled. He wrenched the steering wheel, the car sliding sideways as he aimed for the narrow gap between two houses. A child's plastic playset exploded against the front fender. A trash can was sent spinning into the dark. He burst out onto the parallel street, the car fishtailing as he fought for control. "Are you hit? Is the boy hit?" he barked, his eyes flicking between the road and the mirror. "No, we're okay, Isabella's response was cut off as Lorenzo slammed on the brakes, swerved around a corner, and accelerated again, running a red light. Horns blared. He was driving on pure instinct, his mind a live wire of tactical calculation. They couldn't go to a safe house Marco knew about. They couldn't go to any of his usual bolt holes. The organization was compromised. His own resources were a weapon turned against him. He needed to disappear. Now. He took a series of random, violent turns, heading away from the city center, toward the industrial wastelands along the river. The sleek luxury car was a glaring anomaly in the land of potholes and chain-link fences. In the back, Leo's cries had subsided into ragged, hiccuping sobs. Isabella was whispering to him, a constant shaky stream of reassurance that sounded like a prayer. Lorenzo's phone buzzed on the seat beside him. Marco. Again. He ignored it. The phone buzzed once more, then fell silent. A moment later, a new alert chimed, a secure encrypted message on his secondary device. He thumbed it open. It was from a dead man, a code he hadn't seen in over a year, a location, an address in the old shipyard district, followed by a single word, sanctuary. Raphael, his old mentor, the man everyone believed had been killed in the same power struggle that had cemented Lorenzo's rise, the man who had taught him that the most valuable fortress is the one everyone thinks is a ruin. It was a risk. It could be another trap, but it was a risk born of a loyalty older than Marco's betrayal. He changed direction, heading for the river. 20 minutes of evasive, nerve-shredding driving later, he pulled the battered car into the shadow of a derelict warehouse, its windows boarded up, graffiti staining its crumbling brick walls. The place looked utterly abandoned. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip of rain and Leo's quiet sniffles. "Where are we?" Isabella asked, her voice hollow. "Nowhere," Lorenzo said, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol as he scanned the decaying landscape. "We're ghosts now." He got out, opening the back door. Isabella looked up at him, her face pale and smudged with tears, her arms wrapped tightly around their son. In her eyes, he saw the last vestiges of the life she had built crumbling away. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a simmering, cold fury. She had trusted him to keep them safe once before. He had failed. Now she had no choice but to trust him again. He reached out, not to her, but to gently brush a shard of glass from Leo's hair. The boy flinched, burying his face deeper into his mother's neck. "Come on," Lorenzo said, his voice softer than it had been all night. "We can't stay in the open." He led them toward a rusted metal door that looked welded shut. He pressed on a seemingly random section of corroded metal, and with a quiet click, a hidden keypad lit up. He entered a code. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a dark, yawning space that smelled of damp concrete and oil. The Philadelphia rain was a fine, cold mist, clinging to the shoulders of Lorenzo Conti's black wool overcoat like a shroud. It was a world away from the curated, sterile climate of his New York penthouse. Here, in this quiet suburb of identical two-story homes and manicured lawns, the very air felt different. It smelled of wet earth, of charcoal grills extinguished by the drizzle, of a mundane peace that was as alien to him as the surface of Mars. He stood motionless across the street, a statue in the shadows of a large oak tree, his hands buried in his pockets. His knuckles were white around the cold, polished steel of the key in his right hand, a key he had never used, a key to the house at 1247 Maple Drive. His gaze was fixed on the warm, buttery light spilling from the living room window. A shadow moved across the drawn curtains, a graceful, familiar silhouette that sent a jolt through his nervous system, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Fear. This was the reason for his exile. Not a business rival, not a failed deal, but this, her, Isabella. A year. 365 days since he had held her face in his hands, the scent of her lavender shampoo filling his senses, and told her the most devastating lie of his life. "It's over, Bella. The life. It's consumed me. You deserve more than a ghost." He had staged her death in a car accident, a perfect, tragic fire that left no remains. He had given her freedom, and in doing so, had carved out his own soul. He had built an empire on a foundation of calculated violence and absolute control. At 36, the name, Lorenzo the King Conti, commanded fear on 3 coasts. He could dissect a rival's weakness in seconds, restructure entire criminal territories without losing a night's sleep, but asking the only woman he had ever loved to disappear, to raise their child in the ghost of a life they should have had together. That had been the most cowardly act of his existence, and the one that haunted him every single day since. His phone, A secure, encrypted device vibrated silently in his pocket. He didn't need to look to know it was another message, another photo, another fragile thread she kept throwing across the chasm he had created. A tiny hand wrapped around a toy rabbit, a gummy, toothless smile aimed at the camera, wobbly, determined steps taken in a sun-drenched living room he had never set foot in. Each one was a shard of glass in his chest, a reminder of the coward he was. He remembered the moment he'd met her, an art gallery opening he'd been strong-armed into attending. While other guests talked of investments and influence, he'd found himself captivated by the woman with storm-gray eyes and hair the color of rich espresso, who moved through the crowd like a whisper. She was a painter, Isabella Rossi, 27 years old, with a laugh that could cut through the densest fog of his cynicism. Where he was all sharp edges and brutal pragmatism, she was fluid lines and unapologetic passion. She wore paint-stained jeans and smelled of turpentine and ambition. They'd been magnetic opposites who created a perfect volatile balance. For 2 years, they were inseparable. He'd cancel meetings with drug lords to watch her mix colors on a palette. She'd drag him to flea markets on Sunday mornings, teaching him about the history in a piece of vintage furniture, while he taught her how to spot a tail or a wire. They were married in a small, secret ceremony in a countryside chapel, with only his most trusted men as witnesses. Then she got pregnant. The joy was eclipsed by a dread that coiled in his gut, like a serpent. The life inside her, a life he had helped create, was the ultimate vulnerability. His enemies would not hesitate to use it, to use her. The daily compromises of marriage had felt like a cage, but the impending reality of fatherhood felt like a death sentence. For them, not for him. The love that had once set him free became the very chain that bound him in terror. So, he had built the prison himself. He had given her a new identity, a new life, and the cruelest gift of all, freedom from him. Now, standing in the rain, he was here to burn the final bridge. His plan was simple, clean, final. He would use the key. He would walk into that house, look into her eyes, and deliver the speech he had rehearsed during the 2-hour drive from New York. The messages stop, Isabella, today, for his safety, for yours. This connection is a threat. Let him forget I ever existed. He repeated the words in his mind, a cold mantra. I'll provide everything. But the photos, the videos, they stop. This ends now. Taking a breath that did nothing to steady the hammering in his chest, Lorenzo finally moved. He crossed the street, his Italian leather shoes silent on the wet asphalt. The porch light was off, casting the front door in deep shadow. He could hear the faint sound of a children's television show from inside, a cheerful, melodic tune that felt obscenely out of place with the storm raging inside him. He stood before the dark green door, the key feeling like a lead weight in his hand. He could still turn around. He could get back in his car and return to his kingdom of shadows and steel. He could let them live in peace, truly live, without the ghost of him haunting their periphery. But he was a man of action. Decisiveness was his currency. Indecision was a luxury he couldn't afford. He raised his fist and knocked. 3 sharp, firm raps that echoed in the quiet evening, sounding like gunshots to his own ears. Time seemed to stretch, then snap. He heard the soft thud of footsteps approaching. The scuff of a shoe against a floorboard, the distinctive sound of a deadbolt sliding back, a heavy-duty one, he noted with a grim sense of satisfaction. She had listened to his lessons on security. The door swung inward, and there she was, Isabella. She looked older, the year of solitude and single motherhood etched in faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands escaping to frame a face devoid of makeup. She wore an oversized paint-smeared sweater and faded jeans. She was holding a dish towel in one hand, and she was the most devastatingly beautiful thing he had ever seen. Her eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had once looked at him with such unwavering love, widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. The color drained from her face, the dish towel slipping from her nerveless fingers to the floor. Lorenzo? His name was a breath, a disbelieving whisper that was nearly stolen by the wind. He opened his mouth. The rehearsed speech was on his tongue, ready to be deployed like a weapon. The messages stop, Isabella. Today. But the words died before they were born, because in that moment a small figure peeked out from behind her legs. A little boy, no more than a year old, with a head of messy dark curls and eyes the exact shade of Lorenzo's own steel gray. The child, his son, stared up at the tall, imposing stranger on his doorstep with a look of intense, unblinking curiosity. The boy's brow furrowed as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. He studied the sharp line of Lorenzo's jaw, the cut of his coat, the intensity in his gaze. Then he lifted a single, chubby finger. He pointed it directly at Lorenzo, and in a voice clear as a bell and filled with an instinctive, profound certainty that shattered Lorenzo's world to dust, the boy spoke his very first word, Padrone. Time stopped. The world narrowed to that single impossible syllable. Lorenzo felt his knees weaken, the carefully constructed walls around his heart crumbling into nothing. He was no longer a king, no longer a don. He was just a man, struck dumb by the recognition in his son's eyes. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth,